Welcome to Other Lands Editing Podcast, where two speculative fiction writers and editors help you craft fantastical worlds by keeping an eye on exacting editing and foundational writing principles. Every 2 weeks, we bring you interviews with other writers, advice on editing, and writers' craft pitfalls, and reviews of popular media to help you grow. So sit back, relax, and join Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss as we discuss all things writing and editing. Hi, this is Margaret Bates, and I'm here with Midnight Voss, and we're coming to you, admittedly belatedly, for the next episode of the Other Lands Editing Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about tropes. So, what would you think are some important things to even say about tropes? Maybe some people don't know about them yet or what they are, or at least haven't realized they've seen them around.
Well, you probably have, at least if you have been watching people on TikTok or on Instagram where they have a picture of their book and they put the picture of it in the middle and then they have these little arrows out to the side and they say only one bed. And that's where they're talking about a trope, which is basically just a major recurring theme or plot structure that we tend to see over and over again. And by that definition, we can guess that this is something that could be very good or very bad because we don't want to do the exactly same thing as everyone else. But at the same time, we do want to be recognizable to readers. And it is one way that readers sort of sort things that they like as they know they like this trope. So if you advertise for that trope, then it can be a good thing. And it is something that in advertising, you take a look at your book and you say, does this connect to anything that people tend to like? And you can put that out there. So it's not like you are paint by the numbers, but you can, after the fact, think about how are people going to respond to this and what would draw them to it. That would be a way that you can start thinking about tropes.
And I think sometimes people, either if it's derisively or because they don't know as much, they do tend to say, oh, it's a trope, it's a cliche. And they are related ideas in that both are common or you see them come up again and again. Whereas cliche in itself means it's so common, it's like unoriginal and shouldn't be there. Whereas a trope, I really think, and this is where again also ties somewhat back to marketing, like you were saying, it's sort of a standard formula or archetype, and it's then what you do with it. But it is something readers are familiar with, and sometimes will read for. They'll be looking for if there's someone who loves a amnesia trope and they
Mhm.
want to see a story where someone has memory loss, they'll seek those out deliberately. And if you just kind of leave it there and it's like, well, my character got amnesia and I'm just going through the same loops I've seen on any soap opera when that character gets amnesia and I'm not trying to put my own spin on it, I think then that's where it can meet the actual line of becoming cliche. But I think, especially in romance, which can be trope heavy, the tropes are the ingredients, and it really depends on how you end up stringing them together if you choose to use those ingredients. Maybe not even like ingredients like flour, but if you're baking cookies, think of tropes as an ingredient like a chocolate chip where you can add it, but if you don't, you can always still make something whole out of the idea. But it is an option that you can learn to use to add more flavor.
Yeah. It comes down to the fact that a cliche is something that I think that it doesn't have as much purpose behind it, that there's this concept in rhetoric that repetition is a rhetorical device. It's a stylistic device if you do it purposefully. And that's why when we analyze speeches and people are repeating certain things, it's not like, oh, well, why are they not saying anything? It's because they're repeating for emphasis. And if you're repeating with a purpose of you want to lean into this element of the trope to develop an idea, or you want to subvert that trope, then you are doing something with it that should connect with readers. Whereas if you're just doing paint by the numbers and saying, okay, billionaire romance, they go here and there's only one bed, and then they're in the rain, and then someone gets amnesia. If you don't see the thrust of the purpose of the story behind it, it can be very like bleh. But at the same time, we do know that we can use tropes as a way of guiding writing, and it's something that can be fun. There is not a lot of play with the soulmate trope, but in fandom, oh my God, there is so much. Like they'll have this, I don't know why suddenly bursting wings out of your back became a trope, but it's a trope. And so they will have a month full of tropes and then you do different things with the tropes. So they'll have wings as a trope or wings with sudden onset wings as a, like you
Yeah, I
suddenly
didn't know
get
that
them.
was a thing because I mean, obviously, I come from a fandom, one of the fandoms where it would be logical to have wings because I watch and write a lot of Lucifer and there's angels literally in that, but I didn't know soulmates in fandom had become just anybody will get wings because,
No,
it used to be that
it's
old
it's not
expression, Red Bull
connected. Those
gives
were
you
two different
wings,
tropes. But the
soulmates
second
give you
thing is like the
wings.
soulmates usually doesn't have a lot of spins on the tropes, but in fandom they will do things where like you have a soulmate mark with somebody here, but you're in love with someone else. And
Yeah.
that's not something that you would see necessarily in the tropes that we have. So playing with the trope in itself can be really generative.
Yeah, think about ways that it has complications that either haven't been explored or that you'd like to explore and be like, well, okay, everybody else assumes that the trope will play out like A, but what if I put a spanner in the works? And it may still play out like A, but it has a lot of complications and weird
Yeah.
issues along the way to get to that point again. I think that's the difference. I think when you have a trope and you just rely on it and say, okay, I know, and we'll talk about this more in depth in a second, but I know enemies to lovers is popular. I'm gonna just have this rom-com where they're both at the same advertising agency and they both are opposed to each other because one of them wants to be top dog and you can't both be the best ad
Yeah.
agency person. So one of them has to do less well with their accounts than the other. So they're already pitted against each other. But you kind of get that feeling if someone's doing it as kind of a mercenary tactic or just because it says I'm supposed to paint by numbers. So I guess I'll get some numbers and start painting. You're going to end up, for lack of a better or kinder phrase, kind of creating motel art. It'll exist and it'll be serviceable, but it will feel like every other wall painting at the Holiday Inn or whatever. So I do think it's important to be, like you said, thinking of them as rhetorical tools and literary tools. And okay, you've picked this trope or even a couple to mix and match if you're feeling advanced. Why did you pick it? What is your angle on it? Why are you taking the spin on it? What other ways can you play with it? Or what ways can you use it to get not just story out, but to say things you want to say about the characters and your
Yeah.
theme? And that's really important. I think when people start just picking a trope because they go, well, I know this seems to be popular and I see it in the bookshops a lot right now, or I see it on the top 10 in Amazon. I think I can make money off of it. Again, when it becomes mercenary, that's when I think some of the power drains out of tropes, or when you see people get tired of tropes because it becomes something that is the bandwagon to jump on.
Yeah, and I wouldn't advertise with a trope that you don't have in there because there's nothing like a romance girly scorned. So you don't want to annoy your readers with this. The purpose is to connect with them, not to piss them off.
Yeah, and I think that's fair too, because I see this with not tropes as much as pairings. Where sometimes people will be in a sort of Machiavellian way. I guess diversity is a trend now, so I technically have an LGBTQ plus character. So if I say there's LGBTQ plus focus, but it's really a third tier character who's in a couple scenes, that won't help you. It's the same thing. If you say I'm doing a trope and it's high school reunion and there isn't actually a high school reunion in the book, which is a really common, especially contemporary romance trope that's 10 years later and they all go back to school or whatever and meet each other. What if could have been reminiscent kind of school reunion night. But if you don't actually have that in your book and you false advertise like anything else, then people get upset. It's both a good tenet not to false advertise if you're writing a book that isn't really a romance, which is a separate topic. But it's also good to, if you put a trope in, you better be executing it as faithfully as you can in a way people will recognize. Even if
Yeah,
you're subverting the trope, you can't just be like, oh, we've got spies. It's not really a trope, it's much a character type, but you know what I mean? So you
yeah,
can't just say something's in the book and then it's not, because you'll end up getting the backlash will be tenfold versus any type of buzz you think you're getting.
that's
So
true.
that's kind of like a handy life principle, just to be honest with what's actually in your manuscript. It serves you better in the long run than trying to play games with it.
Yeah,
I guess right now I'm working on two books on and off in the middle of grad school, which is a lot of work. But one of the books I'm working on has, I guess I'd say it's definitely an enemies to lovers trope because they're both on opposite ends of a struggle because one's a vampire hunter being trained at this academy, and one's sort of a vampire hybrid undercover. So they're literally on two sides of two different potential factions. The other book I have, The Keating, I guess it has kind of a Beauty and the Beast trope just because he has a demonic side to him, which is often something he can't control, which I'm always very interested in the Beauty and the Beast trope, even since the movie, but also just in general, that kind of someone is a monster side or that they can't hide as much. But I guess that's the big ones I can think of. You probably won't find me as often doing enemies to lovers. This is a little bit newer for me, more because I guess sometimes I have that association with it just being more casual work frenemies kind of have bickering, and I've never liked
Yeah.
that when it's done
We'll
that
talk
way.
about the subtropes actually in a few minutes. I think it's funny that of our main projects, I'm the one who's kind of doing friends to lovers,
Yeah.
which is one of your favorites, and you're doing enemies to lovers, which means I'm going to really enjoy editing your book. For my current works in progress, I am straining to think of what the tropes are for Lavender Dusk, and maybe I need to just think about it more because it's just such a weird book of like depression is depression and monsters.
Yeah.
But for the one that will be out within the year, Not the Hero, it is a little bit more of a friends to lovers arc, although that's by the second book. At this point, they're just slowly progressing. I guess you could say the slowest of burns because they're going to be 2 years between the books and they're not going to get together until maybe the middle to moving into the end of the book, but not in the last 50 pages. So we have that going on, and I think that's the major romantic trope. They do kind of get off on the wrong foot with swords drawn, but it's not like they're enemies or anything. The hero, he's way too friendly for that. He's like a mix of Steven Universe and Sailor Moon. He wants to be friends with the people who he doesn't want to fight people and he doesn't want to kill people. So you could say makes him a reluctant hero, but I can't advertise it that way because he does want to save people, but he doesn't want to kill people. So I guess the trope there would be imposter syndrome, is that he doesn't feel like he's prepared for this. And then there's some microtropes in there. There's definitely hurt comfort. There's a scene where it's the opposite of having only one bed. Like there are plenty of beds, but they all decide to stay in the one bed for reasons. So I would have to think closely about what I would advertise. I think that too many beds is something that people will advertise these days as just kind of a joke because only one bed is such a popular kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say that it's not a romance trope in yours, but I have realized because we've been watching like The Mighty Nine and the Legend of Vox Machina, and I'm not like
Yeah,
really huge on high fantasy, as you guys have probably picked up by now, but there's a cursed weapon that has a cost to use does seem to be a
right.
trope or subtrope that comes up a lot in
That's
high fantasy.
a big D&D
Yeah.
RPG thing. Oh, here's a cursed piece of armor. We've been watching these fantasy things because I like them, and it's mentioned in Delicious and Dungeon, and it's in the Mighty Nine and Vox Machina. There are just cursed weapons around, and usually in a video game, that means just sell the thing because you're never going to be able to use it properly, even if it has some benefits, but that's not the case. I guess I could put cursed weapon on there. Cursed weapon with an attitude is what it ended up
Yeah, I
being.
think you could. Yeah, I definitely think that is. And it's not necessarily, like I said, a romance trope, but it's definitely something even
It's
I, with
not.
my really, really limited knowledge of fantasy, it's like, oh, Curse Weapon is definitely something you keep seeing as a through thread.
But if you're breaking it out more towards general tropes, and there's definitely kind of a found family thing in there, and people really respond to that, whether it's in romance or not.
Yeah, people definitely do that because I think there's that like found family bleeding into that band of roguish misfits, which definitely I'm getting is a thing in D&D based fantasy is we're all kind of like madcap characters that have to come together, but people like that found family slash misfit bad news bears ragtag band as well, which I think its own kind of trope or archetype. So you can see that you can have fun with tropes and you can pick ones that you like that have been endearing to you that you want to put your own spin on. I just think like anything with writing, if you want to come at it, you need to come at it from a place of I'm doing this both because I feel it fits the story that I want to tell, and that's the vehicle to get me there and get my characters emotionally there, and that it's something that you're doing not just as necessarily a financial calculation. Now I say that whereas this is also a business, so you have to kind of meet that harmony, hopefully,
Yeah,
of where plot and what you want to do versus what's technically marketable. But I do think anytime you just throw a trope in because you feel like, oh, I need to throw this trope in because you feel external pressure or popularity pressures of like what's cool now, that doesn't necessarily work because you can't write something
yeah,
if you're not at least a little interested in it. It is hard because there is this tension between what you feel you ought to do and what you want to do. And I'm not saying that's never a balance, but I just feel anytime you're just throwing something
yeah.
in because everybody else is talking about it on the social media right now, or it seems to be the cool trend you see in Instagram posts or TikToks, it's not going to work out. It's like when I used to ghostwrite really silly, like chic Orientalist romances, which I
Oh, yeah,
needed the money. It was not great. But they kept wanting me to do an abduction trope, and I can't do that because deep down, I'm not passing judgment on people who like the con or non-con. I am very much of that old school fan fiction ilk of don't yuck someone else's yum, or, just because it's someone else's lemon doesn't mean it's not something someone who's a second party could like. But it wasn't for me, so I couldn't convincingly write abduction based or dubious consent fiction because it was just something I didn't like or gel with, and also something I never read examples of because I'm not going to seek out something I don't like to read on my personal time. So I think there's also that part of, okay, you're picking a trope because it's popular, you think it'll boost you in the algorithm. Hate that we have to say algorithm when we apply it to writing because that's the world we live in. But if you don't even read it or like it or have an affinity for it, even from a Machiavellian point, you're not going to be able to fake doing it well because it really has to be something you at least have organic interest in to enough of a way to differentiate it from the pack.
yeah. You
Some of
do
the
want to be
cautionary.
cognizant of what it's like in play. And you definitely don't want to write things that you don't want to write because it's harder to do that. And life is hard enough and writing is hard enough. So it is one thing I'm going to say, beware not to include these tropes just to include them because it can come off as fake. Other things that we worry about when including tropes is that it may end up killing the tension or becoming boring if you're
Yes.
doing it a little too closely to what everyone has always seen, or if we're just going to call out fated mates here, if you use the trope instead of developing the relationship, it can end up being boring. So I know a lot of people love fated mates, but I see just as many people bitching about it on Reddit because every time they go into those stories, they know that the guy's going to act this way, the girl's going to act this way, and they're not going to see enough tension between them. And they have substituted doing the work of writing the story of their romance with, okay, well, they have this bond that makes them always horny for each other, and that's it. So
Yeah, I think
where's
it's
the tension?
partially
It's
like
probably an
being,
evil girlfriend. Sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, it's just being editors who happen to have seen a lot of first, second draft level newer writers attempting to write fated mates. And we happen to see it when it's executed sometimes initially or not as well as it could be. Hopefully, after our notes, it gets better. I think we're a little burned out on seeing it where fated mates becomes the shorthand, especially in paranormal fiction, especially in paranormal shapeshifter fiction, because you see it so much in werewolf or other like in type fiction, where it really is just a shorthand for I don't have to build this relationship, as Midnight was saying, because you'll see it, and by chapter five, they realize they're fated, so they're already kind of up the high heat level. And that does tie back into we've talked over different episodes, just sort of in happenstance or just in the passing about how you have to think about where your arc is going, so to speak. You don't want to, pardon the pun, shoot your wad early. But if you start with high heat romance or a lot of explicit stuff, usually in the first couple chapters, or the attraction is super like a bolt of lightning, then you don't have anywhere to go or anywhere to develop it over the course of 300 pages. So I think that's the other double-edged sword with Fated Mates is when it's done poorly, which is I see it more often right now, done poorly than not. It becomes this, well, they like each other by chapter five, there's nowhere else to go. So yeah, you're right, Midnight. You end up with it's just kind of mostly based on only external conflict in the book, and that dreaded old girlfriend rears her head, And it's also kind of gets that weird undercurrent of like internalized misogyny where it's that
Yeah.
woman's kind of the homewrecker. It doesn't always go that way. I've just read a lot where unfortunately it has gone that way and it has burned me out on that trope a lot. It never becomes a complication to their fated mates if they just kind of acquiesce to it really fast. So their relationship gets solidified super early in the story.
I did read one where she has a fated mate who does a magic thing on her to break the mating bond, and it ends up being a white shoes, but he ends up in the mix. I really wanted him to just die because I feel like from what we know about what the mating bond is, it's supposed to be sacred. To do that is super evil. So that is one example of where I saw someone play with it. You could play with that, and I would be satisfied if she told him to go kick rocks and went off to screw 20 other guys. That would make more satisfying, I think. But of choices we all make. So, but he didn't get to keep her by himself when he came to his senses, so better. Um,
Evolves it a little because then there is that choice where he gets to sort of be there, but be in a more poly arrangement or a shared arrangement.
Yeah.
I think this
Um,
leads back to we were talking earlier because I was talking about my past as a writer, so dubious consent. But I think Fated Mates does bring in that. I mean, there are kind of consent issues with it because then even if it's just because it's literally fated and mystically, because I see it the most in paranormal, then the consent of the characters is kind of taken out of it, or especially if one of them is really, I'm happy with this, and the other person wishes it weren't so, it changes that consent dynamic as well.
that part's the worst for me of reading these. It's not necessarily that they're faded or that they're screwing all the time or the screwing all blends together. It's that he can be as vile as he wants to be, but he knows that she's going to come back to him because they have this bond that means that she can't not want him.
Like a literal biological imperative, but
It's
not like she's
biological
excited
rape
for it.
at this
Yeah.
point. And when you write it that way, it just gets icky and it moves from hot to icky very quick. So I know that some people really like that tension between them where he's like grr and she's like meh, and it's like the bratty princess type. And that's fine. But if you write it to the way that he is smugly looking at her, being as awful as he can be, knowing that she can't say no to him, that's where it gets real gross. And I don't like it. I don't like it when they act like her being aroused means that he wins, because that's something that can happen to you even if it is a stranger who held you down on the street. So that puts it into such weird territory that bears some reflection in how you write it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's difficult because people want to play around with what they want to play around, and I don't want to be the police on this. But I do think with fated mates, because they're often you see it with werewolves, they'll be like, I can smell you want me. And it's in this case, and she can't help that she's aroused because it's something their mating bond has put in her. And I know we keep
Yeah.
gendering it, but I see it the imbalance, especially in consent with fated mates, paranormal
Mhm.
werewolves, where he's the alpha male werewolf of the pack and he's the leader, and she's going to be his. They use this term a lot, which kind of got put into the canon of that, or the tropes of mini tropes in that in the last 5 or 6 years, whatever. She's the Luna. She'll be the next queen of the pack. And I just keep seeing that dynamic so much, and it keeps him on the higher level, him at the advantage, and
Yeah.
her most often at the disadvantage, and not as into it is not really even the way to say it, just kind of forced to go along with it. And it will be stories that don't examine what that is for her emotionally, how that is, because it's fated, I guess puts a sheen on it where the author maybe doesn't question it as much, or maybe it just being such a common trope. They don't question about the consent issues inherent with it and have a dialogue about it. You don't have to be didactic about it, but there should be something where it explores the tension in the character herself when she's in the situation. Maybe she learns to adjust to it, or she learns to accept it, but the journey of learning to go through that acceptance gets left out. And that's when it
Yeah.
becomes more consent issue problematic.
I like a lot more reflection on the male character's perspective as well,
Oh,
as that
yeah.
they're so flat in these types of stories. So again, not every type of story, but if you're running afoul of these other issues we're talking about, then you're not reflecting enough about what makes that male character a fully fleshed human being to begin with, and how does he feel about having to be a part of this relationship either way. How would he feel about her clearly refusing him at every turn? Because he shouldn't be smug about that. If he's really into her, then that would be hurtful. And he'd be upset that there's something that he's doing that they're supposed to be together, but she doesn't want you. That's a conflict, and we don't want to erase the conflict because the conflict is where the story lies. Because this is such a popular genre, wanting to take the trope and do something slightly different with it can make you stand out because it's refreshing. People will go on reading binges, will they'll read everything that anybody will recommend within that genre and within that subtrope. And if you can stand out in some way, this person really dug into it in a way that like scratched an itch that can be helpful. I did want to transition though in from what you're saying of like how this goes into harmful stereotypes because
Yeah.
it is a power dynamic often. That's not every trope, but this trope in particular is a power dynamic. Almost always. It doesn't have to be, though. Most of the time in Fated Mates, they make it as a hetero thing. It doesn't have to be. Your soulmate could literally be someone of the same sex, but that's not how it is. A lot of the Fated Mates things that I read, at least as an editor, it's like gay people don't exist. So that's fun for me.
I think one thing that I tried to explore last year, but I was sick, so couldn't make PCA, the Pop Culture Association, the way I wanted to, was looking at the Beauty and the Beast trope, which I love, but
Yeah,
especially in historical romance, gets translated often into the hero is grumpy and a recluse because he got injured in the War of 1812 or whatever British wars are out there. I don't know all of them, don't at me. But he was away and injured at war, and now he has a scar. Now he has a hurt arm or whatever, or something visibly disabling him, and that's why he's had to retreat from society. I know Tessa Dare has a really good one that's a sort of take on that, where he gets injured and has a scar, and the heroine comes to help be his secretary and help him get through the stack of letters he's missed and all these business dealings he has to catch up on because he was literally on the front. And I liked it, but it does come with the idea that if you translate the Beauty and the Beast trope outside of a fairy tale setting or a paranormal setting, and you translate it into contemporary or especially again historicals a lot because the hero becomes physically scarred, then you may end up reinforcing some disabled stereotypes and
yeah.
things that just creates disabling as other, disabling as ugly. So that's something that I think people aren't always as aware of. Trying to think of other ones that reinforce
The
harmful
other harmful
stereotypes.
stereotype we've mentioned already of the evil ex-girlfriend, of
Hmm.
there are this repeated trope of all women have to hate each other, that all women are against each other. The entire purpose of this character is just to be like a mild antagonist. They're not a real character unto themselves. If somebody has multiple exes that really want to screw with stuff, I worry about the person. Maybe they have a tendency to fall into relationships that are bad for them, which what does that say about our relationship? Or maybe they're the bad person in the relationship, and that's why he says every one of his exes is crazy. So I would reflect on how you're showing dynamics even between women in the stories when you're using these tropes because it's so common to have this 90s rom-com attitude
Yeah,
towards women and it de-evolves what's going on.
yeah. So right now we're going to transition to talking about some of tropes in more depth. I'm not saying all of them are ones we love, but some of them are ones that we either see a lot or ones that we do actually enjoy. So I guess we'll start with sort of two ends of a coin with enemies to lovers, or also the question of friends to lovers, because you're usually not the same thing. But whether you have the enemies to lovers, or they're kind of starting from a stranger relationship to friends to lovers, where it grows out of a base that's already there. So
Yeah.
enemies to lovers, I've already alluded to like once or twice because I've seen it done well, or at least or fan fiction did it well by drawing on what was in the source material,
Right.
I guess. And you'll talk about that too, since you're a Klexer.
Yeah.
But again, often I just see it where it's more like petty bickering, or especially they basically put each other down like 7-year-olds who can't get along. And then halfway through the book or the movie, they're like, oh, we're friends now because we're like boinking. And I mean, the animosity goes away and there's less like one-liners. But I've just seen it really poorly construed, especially in very subpar rom-coms, but also in a lot of just bad contemporary romance books of as long as they bicker a lot, that's enemies to lovers. And I don't think that's really the scope of that trope.
So we have a couple of subtropes in here, and they get confused in enemies to lovers. It's very popular, and that's why everyone wants to label it that, and then that's why everyone gets really pissed off. It's because we have a couple of different things going on here. We have first, everyone wants to be the next Pride and Prejudice. They were not enemies. They were a bad meeting to lovers, of maybe annoyance to lovers is the term that we would use right now. That they got off on the wrong foot. They had some type of animosity toward each other, but they were not on opposite sides of a war, and they eventually resolved their misunderstandings. So if you're starting with this is a misunderstanding to lovers, this is an initial annoyance to lovers, then that's where you're going with that. And I think that's where most of these books are, is that they initially meet each other, something happens where they're annoyed with each other. They act like 7-year-olds, and then suddenly they're screwing. So it's too fast for starters. It took Darcy and Elizabeth forever to resolve their issues. You would need to say, what are their issues? Why do they actually dislike each other, other than the fact that maybe he stepped on her foot in line or
Yeah.
something, and now they hate each other forever? It needs to be something real, give it some meat, give them something to resolve, and then you can get that sense of progression that will be satisfying instead of just relying on Marvel style banter for a little bit. Because if you're relying on that Marvel style banter when they hate each other, what's going to happen to their sexual tension when it resolves if there's nothing underneath that? That's not great. Beneath that, you have the rivals to lovers. That's a different trope. You're doing a different thing. These two people hate each other because they have the same goal. They are both trying to get to the same thing. So you portray that dynamic with a sense of competitiveness. And that's a different trope you can see, because if you're looking at enemies to lovers and they're literally on other sides of the war, like This Is How You Lose the Time War or Nina and Matthias and Six of Crows, then you have two people who have to think about their ideology and what their preconceptions were and how they slowly move from their points toward each other and then collide. And that's what makes Enemies to Lovers so satisfying, is that not just one of them changes. They both have to reevaluate their world and how they understand things and move towards each other in spite of different ideology, different raising, probably strong motivations on both sides. It's not just something where they just decide to be mad at each other. It's that in the case of Nina and Matthias, literally his side are witch hunters and she uses magic. He's there to kill her. They put her on a ship. They were going to take her and kill her. Period. And then they get separated and they have to lose each other to survive. And then they fall in love. And this is how you use the Time War. I mean, it's a little bit rivals because everyone's has the same goal of changing the future, but they're on opposite sides of the Time War. And they enjoy fighting with each other so much that it becomes flirting, becomes I'm going to change the timeline so that we can be together, right? And so there's so much meat that could be there, but it gets ironed down to two dogs sniping at each other.
Yeah, that's the part. It's just like you realize on that one thing. I think the Marvelification of it is a good example. And I like Marvel movies, but I think people just take the, let's be honest, originally very much Whedon style dialogue and thinks all I need is like flippant banter and then voila, they'll have sex and it'll be like a really compelling romance. And I think you're right. It has to really qualify as enemies to lovers. They have to be enemies. They have to have different stakes on the side of something. And again, it's not necessarily that, if you're writing contemporary, the stakes can be, like I said, different sides of at least a job or a promotion, or if she's an environmental activist and he's the hedge fund manager looking to bulldoze the local park. It's silly, but they have to have something where they're intrinsically 180 degree opposite, and either they have to learn to work together against usually a even bigger common enemy or something, but they can't just kind of not like each other because they like to bust each other's chops. That's not anything. And we were mentioning Klex, obviously, in the way the show, it's not romantic in
As in
Smallville.
Superman, as in Smallville.
Yeah, but with Clark and Lex, he's an alien, and Lex becomes, especially in the TV show, more and more paranoid for good reasons by other aliens looking for Clark who've abused him. But he becomes more and more paranoid about aliens and using tech and military contracts to try and stop them, which would technically also include Clark as friendly but still Kryptonian. So they're on other ends of how to deal essentially with interstellar politics and how to protect the Earth. And that's a big set of philosophical questions to have goals about and to have different approaches to how do you stop this? Do you become very Machiavellian and create medical experiments that are unethical, or do you try and offer hope, etc.? But it's not just banter. And I think that's the difference. I feel like
Yeah.
enemies to lovers has gotten a bad rap, especially in the last decade, where you see disgruntled fans on Reddit threads and stuff because it's just been reduced to really obvious 13-year-olds pulling on each other's hair on the bus banter. And that's not what it is.
And you bring up Klex, that means you get to talk about both friends to lovers and enemies to lovers, and friends to enemies to friends to lovers.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because early Klex people, they were friends. They were not on opposite sides at the time. It was two guys who were friends. There is an age gap, but not as much as that was in season 4 because they changed their ages because the show couldn't have any continuity. Clark got
No,
younger over time, which was insane. They were all supposedly 16 at the time, and Lex is like 20.
20
Um,
or 21. Yeah.
so they were in a Romeo and Juliet age gap, and it became much more weird. But at the
Yeah.
beginning of the show, people would write them as guys who were intensely close friends who became lovers. And later it was, okay, well, we used to be friends, but now we're enemies, which is a delicious dynamic because there's so much more history there. And then you go from that to, well, we used to be friends and we used to be enemies, and now we're on the same side, inching back towards each other. Okay, so there are so many things you can do with it. Let's talk about the tensions you can have with friends to lovers, because I think it gets overlooked because there's not that automatic banter tension.
I mean, unless they're friends who have a good rapport, but it's not coming from a frustration or a conflict place for that kind of banter or reportage. So I do feel that with friend to lovers, I feel there's a lot of room for especially internal conflict because I think a lot of the times the way I see it and the way I understand it, or the way I prefer it, let me put it that way, is it's both of them understand they have some sort of instinctive chemistry with each other, but one or both are afraid that I'd rather have this person as my friend and have less of a scope of relationship with them than I would actually want if they were my romantic partner. But at least I don't risk, being romantic partners for a year, messing it up. We have a messy breakup and then I never see them again. So it's that self-hampering because of fear of risk and fear of falling and fear of emotional damage. I don't like friends to lovers, and this is kind of a Smallville nitpick as much when it is presented as one of them has always been kind of just seen as my best buddy, might as well be my sibling, and they develop a crush that's one-sided, or at least at first is one-sided, so they just kind of look jealous and bitter and like an incel, while their other friend who has never expressed romantic interest in them to that point dates, because that's what you would do, is you would date someone who isn't your friend. We talked about how enemies and lovers can go wrong. I think friends to lovers can go wrong where it becomes like one of the two characters really is entitled or feels they're in the friend zone, which is how I felt at the beginning in season 2, especially they wrote Chloe with Clark. And then she kind of had a redemption arc because she did all these really dumb things. And she was 15 or 16, so you do dumb things where she agreed to, you know, trade stuff out for him to the bad guy, Lionel, for a column at the Daily Planet, actually. But then she had to make that up and then became a very unselfish, well, I like him, but I'm just kind of gonna
Yeah.
settle into being a friend and a helper for good or ill. But I'm just saying that it can be written as someone's the friend zone person who's a little bit icky. So I
I think we
prefer it
see
more
that
when
a
there's the
lot.
internal conflict. Yeah.
But with the genders flip is we see a lot where the guy is the friend and then he gets mad that she's dating someone else. You've never verbally expressed to her that you want to go out her with her.
I feel like the How I Met Your Mother reboot with Hilary Duff kind of had those vibes for the male lead, that if it had still
It
been
did a
going
little
on.
bit.
The
And then
guy
you
I
think
assume was
also
eventually gonna be the dad was gonna, yeah.
of Xander
Oh
and
yeah, so much
his
Xander.
crush on Buffy that never
Never
really goes
stops.
away, but there is an episode in the first season where she tells him, I don't really think of you like that. I consider you a really close friend. And so him continuing to have that entitlement towards her after that was always going to sour me towards him in spite of anything else he did because I have had, who hasn't? I've had the experience where I thought someone was friends with me because they wanted to be friends with me and they wanted to date me. Sorry, buddy, I'm a lesbian. And then what happens? I don't have a friend anymore. And that is something I think it makes friends to lovers kind of like a little bit of is if somebody offers something and they say no, do you not have a friendship anymore because you didn't value that person? In the way that you read it, that person would be, well, I'm going to shoot my shot and they say no. And you're like, well, I love them so much. I will take anything. I will still be friends with them because I value the friendship. And if they don't value the friendship, I would be pissed.
They weren't your friend to begin with. It's
They
kind of
weren't
like
your
the
friend to begin with.
dot
They
dot
just
dot.
wanted to screw you, and it was never going to happen. And also, I was too young for you. But
So I guess
it's
there's a way
personal.
that this can go either way. I think any trope can go either way because people bring baggage to tropes because I've been doing a lot of research for school, at least last year with reader response theory and efferent reading, and those are big words, doesn't matter. But people bring their life experiences to reading is the part that it boils down to.
Yeah.
So people who have already had a friend zone experience where they were like, I thought that was my friend and they weren't, will probably not ever be fans of friends to lovers. We'll mention it in brief later, but I have a friend who just doesn't like Secret Baby because she had to try really hard to do IVF treatments to get her twins. And so the idea of someone, it didn't fit with her life history, you know?
Yeah,
So I think
Secret
everybody
Baby is
has
weird to begin with.
tropes that they're like, I can't do it because my life has been like X and I don't understand the fun in it. And I totally get that. But I do think with friends to lovers, that can be a pitfall where one of the friends kind of can come out looking like an incel or someone who just won't, not just take a hint. Usually, if it's done really poorly, won't be respecting of consent or of what their friends' wishes are, and then they're not a friend at all. So there is that.
I think if you're careful of that, if you're careful of your friend's consent, if you still value that friend regardless of whether you're together, then that would be okay, even if you had those issues. So I put one on this list. So this is happily ever after. And it does include that issue of like potentially losing the friendship. The story is that they just defeated the evil lord, and the hero wants to immediately tell his best friend that he's in love with him because he realized that during the course of the adventure, but he didn't say anything because other stuff was going on. But then he gets this magic crown on him that means he has to get married and have his soul bonded to someone. And he's afraid if he says that to his friend, then his friend will do it not because he's in love with him, but because he doesn't want him to die and he doesn't want to take his friend's autonomy away from him. So he spends the whole stupid book trying to find someone else so that he doesn't trap someone that he loves. So that's a good example of I can make it complicated if I want to. You might want to strangle the lead a little bit at some points because he could solve this at any time by telling his friend that he's in love with him and just going with whatever happens. But it's understandable. You don't want to hurt that person. They're the one you care about the most in the universe, whether or not they decide to love you or not.
Yeah, I saw the movie version of Emily Henry's rom-com, People We Meet on Vacation, which is about these two friends who meet because they go to the same college and one year one of them drives the other home for spring break. It was more like they found each other in like a bulletin board and like, okay, whatever. But then they realized they liked vacationing together, so they did it every summer for like 8 summers. And the reason it's people you meet on vacations, they go to different locations, meet different weird people as their little whatever. But they've obviously realized along the way they have good chemistry and they kind of want to date. It kind of explodes in their faces because he technically already has a girlfriend who's a long-term on and off girlfriend. But the point is, in that case, I thought it worked really well, both because she presents it in this really interesting kind of competing timelines, panoply of not in order. It's non-chronological from each weird subgroup of people they meet, like New Orleans or in Norway or whatever. But the real heart of it is that there is that strong internal conflict of both of them are just so afraid of, even though they know when they vacation together in the summers, they have a blast and they see sides of each other, even their families don't see in normal circumstances. They just can't bear to lose it. So they're both really scared that if I ever go any further, it would collapse. Plus, also, she's got that kind of fear of commitment. She's the one who's got a fear of commitment. So it's
Yeah.
a real big different thing to do it for 3 weeks in the summer and then try and feel like you're enough to sustain something year long, year in, year out for presumably as long as you're married. But I think it just worked because of both, it was told in a really creative way because of the sort of non-chronological, what was more important or on their minds at the time as characters than like straight linear, but also because the internal conflict was really well woven together and no one comes out looking like that. His girlfriend doesn't come out looking like a crappy person.
Yeah.
They eventually meet up after the two leads are together and the woman's like, we had a lot of our own problems. I used to kind of blame you, but we just didn't click for certain reasons on our own. So long after he stopped being friends with you, we still couldn't make our relationship work. So again, I always am conscientious of that. I think it's built in from just growing up on those often poorly written rom-com films of the late 90s, early 2000s, where there is so much of that internalized misogyny. The third wheel woman must be awful. It's always the evil ex-girlfriend. I'm glad books have really tried to move away from that in the last decade or half decade or so. And I like to see that. I like to see people not be, well, it's only because this one person is an unrepentant mustache twirler. And 90% of the time, it's always the ex-girlfriend, not like an ex-boyfriend who's the unrepentant mustache twirler. So that's kind of helpful. So the next one on our list is Grumpy Sunshine, as far as ones that we like. And I am actually the one who wanted to talk about it because I am a huge fan of it now, which is funny because I wasn't until I started just writing it. And I'll be honest, fanfic, but I saw the dynamic of it and it is really fun for me. And in my case, I write it for Michael and Ella from Lucifer, which is really funny because they've never officially met where she knows who he is
Right.
on the show. But I like it because, and in this case, the dynamic is she's the sunshine and he's the grump. He's literally the angel of fear, so there's not a lot of like perkiness there. But for me, it was just kind of fun because they both have, believe it or not, similar life histories where they come from these big extended families with lots of older brothers or other brothers who kind of treat them like crap. And her coping mechanism was to just become more sunshiny and accommodating and kind to people so they'd love her back as a big attempt to be appreciated with her work family. And his reaction is to be a complete dick. So like it's funny because they have completely opposite coping strategies, but they kind of can call out in the way I write the dynamic, the bullshit in each other. But I think it's fun to see this. I read a book that I keep talking about that I love a lot called Fan Service, where in that case, she's the grumpy goth girl who's closed off from people, and he's the sunshine, sort of the big dumb himbo type. And that works too. I think I've seen a trend more lately because it's risen with the tendency in a lot of rom-coms and contemporaries right now to write himbo characters for dopey, well-meaning guys who are kind of hot, where they're usually the sunshine, the golden retriever type character, and then the woman is the grumpier, more reserved black cat type character, and that can be a really fun dynamic to play with because it also leads to comedy in and of itself because the sunshine person always is overly enthusiastic, very like Martha Stewart on crack. So there's that chance to have just comedy by the nature of trying to drag someone out of their sort of regular grumpy routine and the friction that causes. Good natured usually, but still that friction of trying to get someone to not just always be stuck in one place with one set of coping mechanisms.
That's a
Um,
good point. I think in general, you have the question of what makes the tension, the introvert extrovert energy of the trope really helps. But then you have their banter between each other. It doesn't have to be antagonistic. It can be on the level, as you said, the effort to draw someone out. The person is grumpy and says something negative, and the cheerful person refuses to be negative too. They put a positive spin on it and they do something that makes the grumpy person smile in spite of themselves. Or on the other end of it, the sunshine person is trying to make the best of a situation and it's clear that it's really something that's hurting them and the grumpy person is going to say straight out, you don't deserve this treatment. because that's who they are. And
Yeah.
so it affirms that you can feel this way, you're allowed. And I think that that variability and the fact that it works with male to female, female to male, female, female, whatever. The dynamic allows you to play with these different characters because they have such different personalities to play on each other. And I think that's important when creating your romantic leads. What do they have that's similar to each other? Like, as you said with Michael and Ella, that background. But then what do they have that shows contrast? So this is not a romance novel in any way, and Octavia Butler is notorious for creating relationships that make you a little uncomfortable. But in Parable of the Sower, she meets the love of her life, Bankole, who is literally a year older than her father. And so you have this girl who is an adult, but she is extremely active, extremely intelligent, and very good with forethought and planning. And then you have Bankole, who is an older man. He is not as deliberately active in things. He sits back and he waits and he listens, but he's not antagonistic to her position. So you get the two of them together and you get the person who's sitting back and thinking smartly. And then you have her who will still plan ahead a lot, but she's going to run into the firefight. So you get this dynamic between two characters who have some things that are very similar in their intelligence, but then you have a way of handling things that puts them at odds. And I think that's a little far from Grumpy Sunshine because neither one of them are. But if you think about Grumpy Sunshine as like we hit a balance with these two characters and it
Yeah.
allows you to explore the difference.
Yeah. How can they center and how do they differ and how are they alike are really fun things. Think about it as an exploratory trip, like you're spelunking with the Grumpy Sunshine crew.
Yeah. And the
The
Grumpy
next,
Sunshine doesn't have an automatic plot that goes along with it.
no.
So it means you can kind of attach it wherever you need to. It doesn't have to be, oh, well, they and start hating each other or not of it. It doesn't have to start anywhere in particular.
Yeah, that's true. It's just character personalities and
Hmm.
temperaments, and it can literally they could be spaceship explorers, they could be pirates, they could be, news anchors. I mean, they could be best friends at high school. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
because it's about their personalities and how they react to situations, not which situation they're necessarily thrown into. So it does give a lot of range to the type
Yeah.
of plot they're put into, or even the type of setting, because it could be anyone that you put people with different temperaments and personalities in. And guess what? Everybody has a different temperament. So the next one we have on our list is fake relationships. And I always associate that a lot with the traditional crop of at this point, it's now like 40 a year Hallmark Christmas movies because I do see fake relationships a lot on the, oh gosh, I don't want to go home single again for the billionth time. Who can I hire to pretend to be my boyfriend or my girlfriend or my spouse or my whatever, just so I get my crazy parents off my back at Thanksgiving or at Christmas or at Hanukkah. And I dig that because I think we all have family who can be insane with a lot of expectations. And who wouldn't resort to good old-fashioned capitalism to get out of the millionth? Well, have you brought anyone home lately kind of questions in those kind of situations? And obviously, fake relationships have other extenuating circumstances. Sometimes you see it in plots where you could only inherit X if you have a wife by a certain date or a husband by a
Yeah.
certain date. So they'll fake it to get the money and then fall in love. Obviously, if you're dealing with characters in a romantic thriller or romantic suspense where they're cops or they're undercover or whatever, and it's part of their mission, that could be a fake relationship. I always just often see it the most played out in contemporary or rom-coms where I either have a reunion or a family event and I just cannot be single for the billionth time.
Yeah.
And the fun of that is seeing where people who think that, okay, this is 100% transactional realize they actually enjoy each other's company. And I think that can be fun.
Yeah, it's like that generalized trope of forced proximity in some way.
Yeah.
We have to get through this somehow, and we weren't spending that much time together before, but now we will. And in doing so, we realize that we really like each other. So that's kind of a wholesome thing, unless you make it weird. So there's that.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I don't think it gets weird most of the time. I guess that's the caveat for every like trope. Like it'll go well unless you make it weird or unless you introduce something questionable. Sometimes I think fake relationship blurs into friends to lovers because sometimes you'll see people who will sweeten the pot with a friend to be like, "Hey, can we just tell my family we started dating?" And so that can be an inroads to do two tropes at once sometimes because maybe someone you'll approach to pay for your wacky Lucy Ricardo level scheme is someone who's already at least an acquaintance or a friend of yours. But I kind of find that one fun because I think it brings chance for farce, which I'm always a fan of sitcom style farce or Shakespearean style farce. But also, I think it's a farce that comes from a good place where really you're just trying to save yourself embarrassment because the family or the will that says you have to inherit or the stupid high school reunion has put a ridiculous amount of pressure on a situation that shouldn't even really exist. So it's like you're trying your best to weather a crappy system with fake dating. So I think it can
Yeah.
be pretty fun overall. It doesn't come from usually a I want to trick people, I want to lie to people place. It comes from I just really want to try and save like my last shred of dignity place. I guess my
You're,
feeling if it came from more of a I'm con artist kind of way, it wouldn't necessarily it could be a con artist, but it wouldn't be as
maybe they're
fun,
both
I
con
think.
artists.
Oh yeah,
It
they're
makes
trying
me
to
think
outcon each
of
other.
Single All the Way, where they go in and he's like, let's pretend that we're dating. And then his friend is like, no, we're not. And
And his
so
family
he,
is like, but you should be. And so
of
their whole
we'll
time
just
trying to match
pretend. And
made.
he's like, I'm not going to go along with this. You need to date someone. And then they do love each other, actually. So it's friends to lovers. It's like a trope fake out.
I kind of is though. But his family's just so involved. I know it's super not realistic, probably, but it is really cute and really recommend that one a lot all
Is
the time.
these guys
It's
need
feel good.
to get a streaming service in this movie
Yeah,
because
their
they're
family needs a
so
hobby, any hobby.
stop being so codependent.
The only version of that I've seen where they are coming at it at first, I guess, from a malicious intent is Mr. and Mrs. Smith because they're both rival spies who are married to each other for recon reasons, but I guess they learn when they get their covers blown they actually like each other.
Uh,
But usually I think the reason I like fake relationships is because it's not I'm lying or creating this fake relationship because I'm a
yeah.
jerk. I'm lying because I just can't be humiliated anymore. And I think that's relatable for a lot of us. If you collect a lot of L's, you're like, I just need a win this one time. I just need one thing to go right for a few days or something.
I mean,
And
I did
I've
write
been
a
there.
fan fiction where they were undercover and the former bodyguard slash friend had to be the fake husband of the lead, and they fought a lot because they weren't friends anymore because the person left, and then they ended up together because of course they did. And then everyone was like, God, finally, you guys, stop making everything our problem. But like
Right?
you can add the characters being complete knobs if you want to.
We get to microtropes, and one of them, mine is favorite, is at least if I see it, I don't know if I would want to sit with it for 300 pages, but the couple who makes everything their couple problems, everybody else's problems. We all know that one couple where that's
Lord,
in real life where that's the deal. It's just like, wow,
please
you guys
stop.
just really need to get a room and get a therapist, and it would help the rest of us. But
Okay, moving on. Triangles. I think triangles are out of vogue. People don't like the anxiety of not who knowing who's going to end up with whom, but the idea of you have multiple choices and who do you choose?
do you think it
It
has
used to be a
bled
big thing.
into, I want to say it's bled into poly more? I
Yeah, it
mean,
sort of turned into the why choose because people don't enjoy the triangles as much.
I like poly that's real poly where like you're allowed to have a really dynamic polycule and there's queerness in it. I'm not a fan of the why choose where authors backbend to get into the quote no swords crossing version, but that's a rant for another day if I ever really have a big inkling to talk about why choose romances as a whole. But yeah, I think the triangles, which were very common, especially as you can think of 20, 15 years ago, in young adult romance fiction or young adult dystopian or paranormal fiction, they got burned out because people are kind of tired of the team this or the team that overall. But I
The
do
things
think
that they were
those
teaming were
people,
not even triangles. You think of the
yeah,
Hunger Games and they're like, are you Team Peeta or Team Gale? And I'm like, I'm Team Katniss. She's not thinking about this as intensely
yeah.
as these guys are.
Or in Twilight, Jacob was always the Elsa ran. It was clearly only in his own mind he was ever going to end up with
Yeah.
her, which just made it really rapey. But
Yeah.
I think people who grew up on those 20 years ago became adult women readers usually who wanted to have that more choice involved. So I think that's why you see more menage or poly romances or also white chooses that have evolved in that space. But I bring it up because I do like, and this is more the idea of hidden identity or superheroes or things like that. I like the triangle for
Same.
two which is most characteristically played out with Superman, where Lois Lane works with Clark Kent, and she's usually, at least beginning the relationship where she doesn't know he is Superman, more interested in Superman as a romantic entity. But I like the idea of the triangle for two because I think it's really funny that you're kind of being cuckolded by yourself. I don't know. It amuses me. Like that idea amuses me. I mean
Yeah,
even the triangle for
it's
two
fun coming up with
because it,
different ways that this person doesn't know what they should clearly know.
yeah. I mean, it's not something that I think it's really held overall, even in Superman media, much in the last 30 years, because even in Lois and Clark, they only played that for 2 years. And then Smallville is its own animal, but the new iteration of the Superman movies really, she either knows him right away, like in Man of Steel as Kal-El, or she already, by the time we see them, knows who he is. And so she just knows in the James Gunn version that he's both. But I
Yeah,
think it's interesting if you were to have someone who is a superhero who's got a secret identity. I think it's unfun for a while to play with that idea of trying to be your own competition. I wouldn't drag it out the length of a book. I wouldn't drag it out longer than a third if you still wanted to play that angle. But I think it can be funny, and I think it can also lend itself to some farce. So I don't like triangles necessarily, but I do think the idea of a triangle for two is kind of hilarious if you're writing superhero fiction and you know how to play with it. The next trope we have on the list, we're almost done with the big ones we want to talk about because we kind of already covered soulmates,
we did. Yeah.
but we can talk about forbidden love, which I think is really interesting. And I think we want to, we haven't had time to watch the show, but we want to later talk about heated rivalry as a thing. And I know that has forbidden love both because they're on literally rival teams, but also because they're hockey players and they can't come out for their careers. But in Ilya's case, he's Russian, so he literally can't come out or he'll be killed, or at least sent to a
Yeah.
work camp because that's how Russia has been working in the last decade under Putin.
The
So
thing with forbidden love is that you do have the option for some internal conflict about the relationship due to societal beliefs, but a lot of the conflict comes from external conflicts because it is forbidden. And you think of what just came out with in a day or two, the second part of it, the next season of Bridgerton, where you have a Cinderella story of Benedict has fallen in love with this woman. He doesn't know who she is, hidden identity. But it turns out that she is the bastard child of a lord who is also a servant. And because the Bridgertons aren't just rich, they are richy rich rich, and they hold a viscountship, that it means that there's no way for them to be together that's not kind of under the table as sus. So that's a conflict that they have to deal with. And then she also has some internal conflict about that third route that they have about being a mistress because she knows where that leads. So it's a lot. And Benedict has to get over his, internalized classism where he doesn't see her. I give him more credit than others do for not being able to recognize her right away because that mask covered like 90% of her
at least
face.
it wasn't a domino mask. I hate when they're like, I can't tell who you are, domino mask. It reminds me of the Green Lantern movie. I'm like, anybody could tell who that is. It's just
Yeah,
over
I
your
don't know. It
eyes.
covered most of her face.
That
He
makes
might
sense
have guessed
logically.
that her sister was it, but he talked to her sister and he's like, no, that's not her. But when he starts kissing her, I was like, you should recognize it. But maybe I'm reading too much fan fiction where they recognize each other through a kiss. But
I love those.
but the outside conflict means that you're unable to marry your external plot with the romantic plot.
I just think it's funny when you have those aspects of things where people sort of see it over time and it's like, I would have thought it was someone who's in a mask at a, I just think it's funny where people like can't tell, but at least they made it plausible deniability. It's bad when places don't like go out of their way to make it at least realistic that someone could be that confused off the bat or be fooled long enough.
I mean, for starters, that man was drunk off his ass before he came to the
That'll do
party.
it.
And
Yeah.
then they were in disguise, and then he doesn't really look at the servants, which is bad. But
That's realistic when you're that rich. I mean, you're not
yeah,
gonna.
but he does have servants that he's very connected with, so it's not like he's as bad as he could be. He's none of them are mean to the servants like others, but it's just that the class issue is a real issue. And so that allows us to have conflict that we can really dig into.
I guess
But
it's
it
good
can be
for
other
him.
things. There were a lot of like YA things going on at a certain point. We're like, what if you weren't allowed to love the person you wanted to? And that's not strange for some of us because that's real life when you are against people being queer or being in interracial relationships.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that was something that I was sort of getting at least underneath with referring to heated rivalry, because people are like, oh, there are stakes back in show, not just because it's a high heat show or a high heat book, but they're like, there are stakes in this. There's actually something keeping them apart. And I've missed books where the characters really have a forbidden love and they can't be together because in a lot of heterosexual contemporary romances right now, there isn't much standing in the character's way except their own issues or their own inability to get out of their own way.
yeah,
And because there doesn't seem to be necessarily a ton of bars right now if you're straight people who want to get together. I think in that way, you're right. Even nowadays, even if we don't live in a stratified class like Regency England, there is still class can be a big issue because especially if you're someone who's from a poorer family or background from someone else, there could be a lot of shame, or there can be a lot of the family of the person who comes from more advantaged position will be trying to work you apart. And that still happens, but there isn't the forbidden angle of she's literally your servant and you have an image to uphold and an estate to
yeah,
manage. I
he
mean, he
can't
doesn't
do
manage
that, or
it.
it will put so much shame on his family that his
Yeah.
younger sisters are not going to get married.
Yeah. I mean, technically, I'm sure that's where the contention comes from, but the only reason they may be able to, I haven't watched it, or however they have their happy ending for Benedict is that he's not a fail son per se. I mean, he kind of has been a dilettante, but he's not Anthony. He's not leading it. I mean, he's technically the second oldest, but there are other responsible air quotes. They're all kind of idiot men, but there are other responsible brothers between Anthony and Colin who could run the household if he like kind of dipped out. But yeah, it would still be scandalous. And boy, have they already weathered three other scandals so far.
Right, it's
So
amazing.
yeah,
They're just
otherwise
like, forget about season one.
any other Regency family would be in all
Season
the
two,
trouble,
Anthony's married to someone when he had a literal wedding and the girl ran out and then he married the sister. Like, that's
right?
wild. They're like, well, the queen said it was cool, so next
Yeah,
season.
it's a good thing their family friend is the queen's bestie, is all I'm saying. But yeah, I think people do miss often, especially in romance writing, where there really are those stakes. I think that's one reason why people write paranormals. I like paranormals because I like fuzzy random things. But other people like paranormals because you kind of do have forbidden love drawn back into it, especially because there often is its own kind of trope or at least convention of these supernatural species don't get along, so you don't want a vampire and a werewolf to end up together or whatever. But I think it's harder to have forbidden romance and check those boxes when it's just a regular contemporary romance set in the United States. Not
Maybe a
always,
little
but
in the
often.
mafia romances or
Yeah,
different biker gangs.
or different rival Italian mafia or like Polish mafia or Irish mafia families. Yeah. Yeah, they write a lot of Irish mafia too, actually. But so they can't because they're literally rival factions. You get that Romeo and Juliet back there. But I think obviously forbidden love is something we think about a lot because it's still something that happens very often for queer people. And you're right, in some places for interracial couples, there's a lot of that tension as well because it just is unfortunately something that as a real life day-to-day society we haven't broken down enough yet. So, but I think people do have a market and a hunger for it. And I think that's why you see it persist in things like historical, where you have that really rigid Regency hierarchy structure, or you'll see it as part of something in a bigger paranormal novel because the species don't get along, or it's something that we explore or people explore in queer fiction because it's something that's a lived experience. So I think it's still very much alive. I think it's just something you see off the cuff that's not in usually contemporary romance because it's a lot harder to create that kind of same level of tension because theoretically if you're two healthy heterosexual people hanging out in the United States you should probably not have that many barriers to getting together. Your mileage may vary. A couple of other tropes we wanted to talk about in brief before hitting the idea of
Yeah,
microtropes. I don't
there are
know.
additional tropes and microtropes that you might think about just on the tail end of it. Second Chance, someday we'll have to talk about that in more detail, but that is
Yeah.
another popular one that we don't have the examples or the time to talk about right now, but that is another common one. I can't see the rest of my screen because my stress toy exploded and it's all over my hands. So what's on
Oh
the next thing?
no. Oh
It's
no.
not the new one, it's the old one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But second chance, yeah, we talked about that. I think that one is something to explore deeper just because it often comes with one day we'll have to dig into like that I'm having a reunion trope or I had to return to my hometown. I have to research some contemporary romance books that cover that or because that becomes a big staple of I had to return to my hometown in shame or I couldn't quite make it in the big city or again, 10-year high school reunion. People always say that, and then that's why romance editors or editors in New York are like, you can have your character be in a reunion as long as it's an off year, but we always read the 10-year reunion becomes so typical that they weed them out the slush pile now. But forced proximity, we kind of talked a little bit about just
Yeah.
because there are certain situations like the we're paid to date, we're faking it, where they kind of have to be in proximity to each other to fake dating. And then Secret Baby, I only brought that up because I ghost wrote. I had to write every story was a secret. Well, it wasn't a secret baby, but it was they had to have a baby by the end. So a couple times she might have ended up finishing her contract out to be the Sheik's partner, and then she'd go home to America and realize after the fact that she was pregnant, and then he wouldn't realize till he came to the States on business, you know, years
Yeah.
later, and like she's got a little plot moppet with her.
I
So
had somewhere it had to be a secret baby, and I had to try to find ways for her to try to tell him so that the readers wouldn't hate her.
I think
It's
that's a
such a
big
weird
point.
trope.
I feel like that can be a pitfall because having someone who's blocked another person who would be a willing partner and a supportive parent, usually the father, because usually obviously the woman who's hidden it, because the guy would she would know. You can't hide a secret baby from a woman if she's going to be carrying it. I hope. I guess you
Right?
just have like pumping her full of memory drugs for 9 months, which is real messed up. But yeah, because it would make her inherently hateable if she just decided to hide that from him and he was seen to be an even-tempered guy who'd be willing to help out or even be
Yeah.
excited about it. So yeah, you do have to add that extra layer of why would she think that he couldn't handle it? Or why does she have a reason to lie to him that doesn't make her hateable? So that's a little pitfall for that one. But you do see Secret Baby a lot in books that have royalty as a theme or sheiks or like some kind of monarchy. You see it in billionaires, but you really see it in royalty, a secret baby, secret heir, all that kind of stuff. So I guess one of the reasons she hit it is it's like a heir to the throne and then intrigue comes into it. But yeah, secret babies definitely exist. There's a whole group of people who are just mesophiliacs and just want to see that pregnancy happen and that baby come with it. So my last thing that we have on our list that I wanted to like let you define, I guess, is like a microtrope. What did that come to
Yeah, I
mind when you
refer to
wrote
the
it down?
microtropes as something, it doesn't really affect the plot all that much. It might be a singular plot point where you have, and this is where we have the like, oh no, there was only one bed. They were roommates. Roommates in itself is not enough to sustain an entire book, or they're in the rain together as a microtrope. And the one that we talk about all the time, that's not really romantic, is they were snowed in and there wasn't enough heat trope.
That one I always think of because we got snowed in and it was cold and I did like it. Not
Yeah.
that I didn't like you, just that
Well,
I didn't like
it was
six
that we
days with
were
no
snowed
power.
in. Okay, we got stuck in the first freeze in Houston and we could not use the water basically at that time. So it was freezing. We couldn't use the water and
We were right.
yeah, so you
Yeah,
can't bathe. There's no heat. There's only one bed, but it's not romantic because you're basically under a billion blankets trying not to die. Usually when they have they're like, oh no, they're snowed in and they just have to do it for a night. Try doing it for a week.
it's awful. But yeah, I think microtropes, I see them more something worked into advertising to be like, hey, here's my little book cover with all my little microtropes on it with the little arrows, but it's more
Yeah,
these are types of scenes you might like. Obviously, a whole book isn't made out of the idea of there's only one bed. Hopefully your characters do more than stay in
that's
bed
not a
the entire
challenge.
300 pages. Yeah.
It's
Or,
too much.
whatever. So I see it as a way to say, oh, this is a cool thing I've seen in other scenes. I'm gonna try it out. They go to a carnival and there's a tunnel of love. Or they go to a carnival and there's that fun house of mirrors that you only see in horror movies and in carnivals, but never in real life. You just put the one scene event that's a common idea you saw, or hey, there's a kiss on a Ferris wheel. It's not enough to be a full book, but it's something you see other people do a take on and you want to do a take on it too. It can be something that's fun for you to put in a scene to like psych yourself up for adding that as a as a garnish or a little decoration on top. But it also can be something that when you advertise can help entice people to be like, oh, I really want to see that one scene and how it plays out. But it's not going to be big enough to be a full book sustaining. Tropes that are that big, that are full tropes, are more types of conflict or types of romantic relationships or personality characteristics that could drive at least the beginnings of a full novel. I think that's about it that I had for
Yeah.
tropes and even the micro ones. Is there any parting thoughts or words you had before I wrap this up, Midnight?
I mean, just have fun with them and realize that they're not the beginning or end of any of your writing efforts. Have fun. Don't let people take your fun away, but also be circumspect, be thoughtful about how you use the tropes.
I think that's true. And I think that's the best advice I would give anybody is what you said already. They're not the beginning or end of your story. You don't just pick tropes and then boom, done, writes itself. Try and be conscientious of where you can put your spin on it so it doesn't kind of blend into the crowd and become the book equivalent of a rice cake. So just they're a place to start, but they're never the only place to end up with when you do writing. So for this installment, I am Margaret Bates, and this is Midnight, and we're happy to have you along. And soon we'll be back recounting our adventures, hopefully just all adventures, no misadventures, at the Mid Atlantic Romance Writers Conference. So until then, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining the Otherlands Editing Podcast. Look for our next episode coming soon, and in the interim, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you want more information or want to connect, you can find Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss at our site, Otherlands Editing. Until next time, keep writing and keep refining your words.